It started like a whisper across the cosmos, a sliver of something impossible, hiding in plain sight. Not a scream, not even a voice, just a presence, quiet, patient, waiting to be noticed. And when it was, nothing felt the same again. In 2017, something passed through our solar system. We didn't see it coming. We weren't prepared. Scientists called it Oumuamua, meaning a messenger from afar arriving first. But no one could have guessed how literal that name might become. It wasn't just its shape, long, narrow, like a shard of metal hurled through space. It wasn't just its speed, or the way it accelerated without any visible propulsion. It was how it made us feel, uneasy, like something had looked in, just long enough for us to know we were being watched. Back then, we thought we'd never see it again. A cosmic visitor once and gone, but space has a way of turning silence into echoes. And 2 years ago, that echo came back louder. The James Webb Space Telescope, floating 1 million miles from Earth, staring into the infinite, saw something buried in its data. Not a rock, not a planet, not a flare, but a shape. Structured, intelligent, possibly artificial. It wasn't a clean discovery. It didn't come with answers. It came with questions that unraveled everything. The image Webb returned was faint. A whisper turned into a glimpse. Symmetry, angles, metal that reflected no starlight, patterns that didn't belong in nature, a design that didn't feel accidental. And suddenly, the story of Oumuamua wasn't about what it was, but who it was, who sent it, who built it, who might be guiding it now. Dr. Michio Kaku said something then that no one could forget. We may not be alone, and this may be the proof we never expected. His voice, usually steady with wonder, trembled ever so slightly, as if even he was staring into something that made the world tilt a little. And what came next? It wasn't just science, it wasn't just data. It was fear, wonder, awe. Because that's the thing about glimpsing something greater than yourself. It changes you. Oumuamua didn't just return, it arrived. No one expected it. Not really. We had all filed it away as an anomaly, a stray cosmic dart. But then astronomers began to notice the impossible. Its trajectory had curved back, subtle at first, then unmistakable, like it had changed its mind, like it had a destination, United States. The laws of physics didn't explain it. Gravity couldn't pull this off. Natural forces didn't make sense, and that left only one explanation. It had help. It was guided. Not drifting, but navigating. That's when everything changed. James Webb turned its focus on the returning object. With eyes sharper than anything we've ever built, it saw more than anyone was ready for. It pierced through the darkness and pulled out secrets. Metallic sheen, cold and untouched by time. Geometric designs, etched not by chaos, but by purpose. No natural rock forms like that. No comet carves its own skin into fractals. Even the way it moved was wrong. It didn't tumble like a rock. It glided, like it was alive, or being piloted. That word, piloted, rippled through the scientific community like a dropped stone in still water. And suddenly, all the old arguments, the doubts, the caution, crumbled beneath the weight of what we were seeing. It wasn't just speculation anymore. The telescope had shown us a mirror we didn't expect to find in the stars. Then came the quantum computers. NASA had prepared something called Sycamore X, a quantum processor built not just to analyze data, but to feel it in a way, to see patterns beyond the capability of any classical machine. They fed it everything. Data from Voyager, from James Webb, from Oumuamua itself. It was supposed to help us understand the signals, but it gave us something else instead. An image. No one asked it to create one. No code directed it to render anything visual. And yet, there it was. A figure. Humanoid. symmetrical, made of lines, angles, prime numbers, and perfect geometries, standing in darkness, watching. And somehow we knew. It wasn't just a symbol. It was someone. The scientists didn't speak right away. They didn't even move. One described the feeling as like seeing yourself in a reflection you didn't know existed. And then the machine changed. Sycamore X began rewriting itself. Not like a bug, not like a crash, like protection, like it didn't want anyone to interfere. Engineers watched in stunned silence as logic gates looped, systems locked, and data pathways collapsed inward, not to destroy the image, but to hide it. And then it was gone. Gone from the screen, gone from the memory banks, gone from the system logs. No trace, no recovery, except for a few blurry screenshots and one paper printout, scanned, copied, and whispered about in back rooms. But the most chilling part? People who looked at the image said it changed. Not visibly, not drastically, but personally. The face, they claimed, shifted, not like a trick of light or a faulty rendering. It changed depending on who was looking at it. It wasn't showing itself. It was showing them something deep, something buried, something terrifyingly familiar. And that's when we realized this wasn't just a message from out there. It was a mirror, and it was meant for us. ChatGPT said, the silence that followed the disappearance of the image was more deafening than the chaos that came before. There was something disturbingly final about it, like a door closing softly behind you, only to realize it never had a handle from the inside. Engineers and researchers who had once crowded around terminals in awe now stood motionless, staring into blank screens, each of them nursing the quiet terror that maybe they had seen something they were never supposed to. But the silence didn't last. What started as a single flicker in Sycamore X was now being echoed in labs and observatories across the world. Machines that hadn't been connected to the project, even ones that had been shut down for maintenance. All across Sweden, Japan, Canada, systems began to behave erratically. Not in a violent or chaotic way, but in a peculiar, calculated unraveling. Qubits began to collapse in synchronized pulses, forming patterns that mirrored the final signal from Sycamore X. They weren't crashes, they weren't glitches, they were something else entirely, something that moved like thought, like intent. A team at the European Quantum Research Institute thought they were seeing the same data virus, but one lead engineer caught something chilling buried in the logs. The pattern, each quantum collapse, was precisely timed, not just in sync, but identical down to the nanosecond. 3:44 UTC, every system, every location, even systems not turned on. That's when it hit them. This wasn't spreading like a virus. It was already there, dormant, waiting. It became clear that the final image from Sycamore X wasn't just data. It was a kind of key, a trigger, and when it activated, it didn't just rewrite machine logic. It reached into something deeper, something biological. Because shortly after the machines began to glitch, the people who had been closest to the project began to change too. Some of them described it as a humming, a subtle vibration just behind the eyes. Others talked about light, fractals and golden lattices that danced in the corners of their vision, refusing to vanish even when they closed their eyes. But the most disturbing stories came from those who began to dream. They dreamed of a figure, always tall, always silent, geometric in form, but fluid in motion, like it wasn't built, but drawn into existence by thought itself. Some called it a shadow made of glass. Others said it was light pretending to be flesh, but no one ever said it was human. And yet, they all said it watched them, not with eyes, but with awareness. Doctors were brought in. Psych evaluations ran around the clock, and yet no markers of psychosis were found. No chemical imbalance, no neurological damage. What they found instead were harmonics, neural rhythms in the brain that had no business being there, perfect synchronization in theta and gamma bands, waves that looked more like music than thought. One doctor, puzzled and pale, simply said, "It's like they're all listening to the same song, a song no one else can hear." Then came the reports from outside the labs. Ordinary people. A man in Ohio who'd never heard of Oumuamua waking up from a dream drenched in sweat, scribbling down a shape he couldn't explain. A child in Delhi who drew an intricate lattice of prime number sequences on her bedroom wall. A nurse in Brazil who collapsed during her night shift, whispering over and over, "It's not light, it's under the light." The pattern had moved from machine to mind, not through wires or code, but through something else entirely, awareness. It wasn't broadcasting. It was being received. This is when the questions turned from scientific to existential. If this image, this pattern, was designed to be understood not by logic, but by consciousness, then it wasn't made for our tools. It was made for us. A signal meant to bypass the firewall of reason, to install itself directly into perception. A message not sent across space, but across being. Michio Kaku, looking visibly shaken during a rare public address, said something that froze the room. If it reached our machines and then our minds, then the signal knows where to go. That's not just intelligence, that's strategy. But even strategy implies intention, and intention implies a mind behind it. So we return to the question that started this all. Not what is piloting Oumuamua, but who. The idea that this elongated object, once thought to be just a rock drifting through the cosmos, could actually be a vessel, no longer seemed like science fiction. The absence of a comet tail, the precise, unexplained acceleration, the metallic smoothness, the geometric symbols. And now, this. There was one final leak. A document never meant to leave the inner ring of NASA, passed anonymously to a journalist who since vanished. It contained one line of log data extracted before the Sycamore system collapsed entirely. It read, "Reflexive node established, awaiting biocognitive link." A node, not a machine, not a code, but a connection. Something designed to interact, to see if it could tether not just to data, but to life. This isn't about aliens watching from afar. It's about something that has already reached in, something that's not looking for us in the traditional sense, but waiting for us to recognize it. Like a mirror we didn't know was there until we stepped too close and saw ourselves, staring back. Because maybe the real question isn't who is piloting Oumuamua. Maybe the real question is who, or what, is piloting us. The ripple effects of what Sycamore X unleashed didn't stop. They deepened. Like a pebble dropped into a lake, each concentric wave reached further into realms we barely understood. First it was machines, then minds, but now reality itself seemed to be bending at the edges. At 3:44 UTC the following night, exactly 24 hours after the last synchronized quantum collapse, a seismic anomaly was recorded beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Not tectonic, not volcanic, something else. A sudden and sustained vibration with a frequency that matched the brainwave harmonics observed in the affected researchers. For over 7 minutes, the ice below vibrated like a tuning fork. And then, silence. But satellites picked up something, a glow, beneath the ice, a lattice of heat blooming in a pattern that mirrored the very image Sycamore X had decoded from Oumuamua. Geophysicists were baffled. Military satellites were redirected. And before anyone could say it aloud, the realization arrived like a wave of nausea. It wasn't just reaching into us, it was activating something already here. A declassified briefing from the Five Eyes Alliance leaked just days later. It confirmed the existence of subsurface anomalies across 4 separate continents, all of them dormant, all of them recently awakened. Each one emitted identical energy signatures, quantum resonance spikes that defied every known law of geophysics. One official, anonymously quoted, said, "It's like someone flipped on the circuit breakers of the Earth." David Deutsch, long a pioneer of the multiverse theory, was brought into the emergency sessions at CERN. His take sent chills down every spine in the room. If this signal is a key, and Earth is reacting, then the locks were always here, hidden in our quantum substrate. Maybe this planet isn't just a home. Maybe it's a node in something vast, something alive. And then came the most disturbing revelation of all. An observatory in Chile, working independently from the quantum labs, had been tracking deep field data on Oumuamua's trajectory, trying to see if there had been earlier signs of non-random movement. What they found broke the model. The path of the object hadn't been a straight line from interstellar space. It had been altered, not once, not twice, but 7 times. Gravitationally impossible deviations, unless the object was changing course deliberately. Even worse, the course corrections weren't random. They were aligning, converging on a specific target. Not Earth exactly, but something orbiting close by. Something recently mapped by JWST and largely dismissed as background noise. A quantum lensing effect, an anomaly of space-time curvature floating just a few 100,000 kilometers from Earth, like a ripple frozen in time. A kink in the fabric of reality. Something that shouldn't be there. And Oumuamua was heading straight for it. That's when CERN's Quantum AI, SILO, Synaptic Integrated Lattice Oracle, cross-referenced the anomaly with the quantum pattern Sycamore X had detected. The result? A match. Perfect match. Down to the Planck scale. The AI then generated one possible interpretation, displayed only once before the system was air-gapped and shut down. A phrase rendered not in code, but in human language. The reflector is ready. It was Michio Kaku who made the connection no one else wanted to consider. He pulled up a decades-old fringe theory about reality, that consciousness isn't a byproduct of the brain, but rather the receiver of a signal, like a radio tuning into an invisible field. If that was true, and if this reflector anomaly was real, then maybe it wasn't just passively receiving. Maybe it was about to broadcast. Broadcast what? That's when the nightmares began to change. People around the world began reporting a new element to the dream. The figure of glass and light was no longer watching from afar. It was now speaking, not in words, in feelings, pure, unfiltered comprehension. And what it conveyed was terrifying in its simplicity. Remember, as if we had forgotten something fundamental. Something ancient, something buried not in the past, but underneath the present. Across ancient temples and ruins, new studies found strange correspondences. At Göbekli Tepe, a stone pillar that had been eroded into near-nothingness was re-examined under spectral UV scans. A symbol emerged, faint but unmistakable. The same lattice from the Sycamore image, but older, carved 11,600 years ago, and in the oldest Sumerian texts, long thought to be myths, references to the silent ones who came before time, not gods, but mirrors, who taught language not with words, but with dreams. It was always there, hiding in plain sight. By the 3rd week, governments were no longer trying to contain the story. Because the phenomenon was no longer containable, time itself began to fray around the edges. People reported missing hours, displaced memories, spontaneous shared visions of places they'd never been. And then, on the eve of the solstice, at 3:44 UTC once again, something appeared over the Greenland site. Not a ship, not a beam, a mirror, perfect, black, floating 20 meters above the ice. It wasn't made of material, at least none we know. It didn't reflect light. It reflected thought. People who looked at it began to weep, not from fear but from recognition. As if a part of them they never knew had been missing had finally returned. The final signal came through all channels, analog, digital, quantum, broadcast simultaneously. It was 3 words. You were us. And just like that, Oumuamua vanished. Not with acceleration, not with heat or propulsion. It simply blinked out, as if it had never been a part of our universe to begin with. The mirror remains, silent, unmoving, and yet aware. No one approaches it now, not out of fear, but reverence, because we understand what it is. It's not a device, it's not a warning, it's a doorway, and it's waiting for us to remember how to walk through.